Hello, everybody. I'm Robin Edman. I'm the Chief Executive of the Swedish Industrial Design Foundation. We're an organization that we work with research, we work with gathering and spreading information about design, and also creating networks and making sure that people that do want to engage in this can be part of what we do and build a society and a sustainable society for the future. Now, we will have on stage today Ezio Manzini and Eva-Karin Anderman. Ezio, Eva-Karin, please. Ezio is a very, very, very renowned researcher, and he is an honorable professor at the Politecnico University in Milan. He's also a chair professor at the University of Arts in London, and a guest professor at the Tongji University in Shanghai and the Jiangnan University in Wuxi. Wuxi. Sorry about that. I don't know Chinese.
Me too.
But Ezio, somebody on stage knows Chinese. Yeah. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. Eva-Karin knows Chinese, so this is the start of a future collaboration where Eva-Karin will help you in China. Eva-Karin is the project leader for something that we call the People-Powered Future Consortium. It's a project that we run within SVID, and it's a project that engages a lot of people. And Eva-Karin is, as I mentioned, the project leader and makes sure that everybody is engaged and pointing in the same direction. So, having said that, we're going to be talking about design, we're going to be talking about social innovation, we are going to be talking about bottom-up, top-down, and we're going to talk about the book.
Peer-to-peer.
Peer-to-peer. We're also going to talk about the book, which is what you can see there. Design when everybody designs. So let me ask you a question. Let me start with this question. You write in your book that it's for your network, DESIS, the Design for Social Innovation and Sustainability Network. What is that network, and why did you write the book?
I write a book because it happened that when you did a very strong experience, you like to tell to the others in some way. And this is the motivation. So this is a book that I'm trying to support a lot because it's not one of the many books that I did in my life and many people do when there is opportunity, but it's really the result of at least 10 years of experience. And so I think that it's very modestly but valuable to try to spread these ideas and to have feedbacks. And what has been the experience? The experience has been that I would say I am a designer, so I'm a design researcher, I am a kind of reflexive designer, but I like to say that I am a designer. So designers sometimes are very, in some way, naive, positively naive. So you look to something and you discover something that is interesting. So it happened to us nowadays, my God, the time is moving, maybe 12 years ago, we had a European research that it was not on this subject, but in some way, as it happened with the European research, we turned it a little bit and we started to observe what we call at the moment the creative communities. It was a group of people that without waiting for laws, without waiting for money, without waiting for help, start to do something that is not foreseen. To live nearby in a collaborative housing, to share the car, to give some kind of organization to the elderly care, to, especially very important, to develop a new way to establish relationship between the city and the countryside and generating a new kind of market, a new kind of food co-op. So at once putting this kind of glasses, looking around for these specific signals that seem to be interesting, we discovered with, like this that there was a lot. We started in Europe because it was a European research, and afterward we have been lucky to have another support by the UNEP. So we did also in China, in Africa, in South Africa, in Kenya, in South America. And we discovered that something was happening. And at that point, we became a little bit less naive, and we discovered that what we had discovered in reality had a name. and it's called social innovation. And so we started to get in touch with the groups that worldwide, especially in Europe, especially in London, were still already working on social innovation. And social innovation is larger than this kind of community. But it was very interesting because as many of you, I think as a designer knows, for a lot of time, I would say for decades, 1 century, when we talk about innovation and the designer have always been linked to the notion of innovation, it was obvious that it was the technological innovation. And the designer were the one that had to create a bridge in between a kind of wild technological invention and the society, in some way humanizing these new technologies. So when people were talking about innovation, full stop, it meant technological innovation. But somebody started to understand and to see something that is not new, has always been like this, that the innovation do not start from invention that are only scientific and technological invention, but could start from everyday life. And therefore, there are inventors that are social inventors. And they invent a new way of having a co-housing, a new way of having a pool car sharing, a new way of having a market. And afterward, this invention, if it is a good invention, can penetrate in the society. And you have, in some way, the same kind of trajectory of the technological invention also for the social invention. And we started to think that the designer could play a role in the same way, because also social innovation is a bridge in between socio-cultural and technological issue, and we can make this bridge. But instead of moving from technology towards society, design for social innovation means to look to the society, to recognize what is new in the society, and to bridge toward technology, meaning a new form of organization, new system to organize, and so on and so forth. This has been the experience. In 10 years, the notion of social innovation boomed. Now it's used at every level and everywhere, from Europe to America to China included. And also design for social innovation luckily spread. We have this network of School of Design, and the network obviously follows this transformation. And this is a too long story. I will tell you afterwards, drinking a coffee.
Yeah, we're going to continue till about 11 o'clock to talk about that. But Eva-Karin...
They let us to stay standing, so they're sure that it will not be too long.
Well, it's going to be about half an hour. But anyway, Ezio's talking about social innovation and how this is spreading. Spreading is probably the word that we use in People-Powered Future, and what we have done and how we see that engage a lot of people. Could you talk a little bit about that?
I could connect to a lot of things that Ezio says. And I would like to start with the mindset of innovation being the technical innovation or technical driven, and people-powered future is actually, we say that people drive innovation, and people-powered future is a design-driven innovation system that we are trying to create or trying to form to connect people and social innovation to society and structures, because social innovation, it starts in a small way, but you also need structures to keep it growing and to make it last for a longer time. We talked about that a little bit yesterday, Ezio, how this is an ongoing process where the social innovation it comes from down under, but it needs some support from the structures, and you need to create structures that actually promote social innovation.
How do you take the grassroots, the bottom up, and eventually turn that into something that becomes policy or a national movement where a lot of people can do it, but under the guidance, so to speak, of a government or something like that, so it actually becomes something sustainable?
Yeah. Well, of course, this is not an issue only for designer, but I think the designer can help the process. Let me say one thing. I said before, when you start to talk about social innovation, you discover that it always exists, and that social innovation is larger than the one that I focused before. I focus on the one that is, technically speaking, the bottom-up radical social innovation. That means I call it also local discontinuities, so something that locally changes the rule of the game. If many people, including me and my group, my friends and colleagues, if we focus on that, it's because for some reason in this moment, this part of the innovation is the most dynamic. And this most dynamic for one reason. The reason is that we are in a phase of this people-driven innovation, if you want, that in turn it is a result for the good or the bad of being a connected, networked society. So, to observe this very local, special discontinuity, so some people starting to do something totally new, is particularly interesting and particularly meaningful of something that is a specificity of our age, full stop. But given that the overall process of transformation, especially if, as I and I think many, all of you, think that this could be a way to move a change towards a sustainable society, this bottom-up initiative could not stand alone. They have to find some interlocutors. Because if you remember, I was talking about our astonishment in finding the heroes that was starting something. But by definition, everybody knows that the heroes cannot be heroic forever. And the heroes are not so many. So if there is a good idea that starts with the inventor, the hero, afterward, some institution has to consolidate it and in some way to make the threshold for other people to do the same lower. So in some way, the combination of institution, businesses, and design try to create systems that permit to much more people to do the same without the need of being what I define as hero. Hero for me means somebody with an extreme motivation and they will do it because they are really convinced that this is what has to be done, even if it is very complicated and difficult to be done.
But
so,
isn't that the whole essence of People Power Future, to have this heroic movement and then institutionalize it in some way where somebody organizes it, but still you have all these people doing their own thing?
Exactly, and that is also what I would say the strength of design as a process. If you let design work and the process lead you, then the heroes can unite in this type of structures. And we see those heroes. It's interesting just now with the migration and everything. We see heroes in society all over. But we also see that the will to do good couldn't be forever. So you have to find structures, how to actually design a society that could help people being the heroes.
And when we're looking at this, we're seeing that we're talking about a lot of things that are happening anyway. So what role does design actually have in this? I mean, you're talking in your book about diffuse design and expert design.
Yeah. But I answer to your question, but after I want to go back to the final point that Eva was saying. Talking about design, and now is not the moment to discuss too much, I mean, because it's a little bit too technical, but there is a little bit of confusion in the way that we use the term design. So I dare to at least introduce two kind of design. The design that is a human capability, and therefore all the movement that I described before, at the end of the day, seen with these design glasses, they are led by designers, by people that are capable to design something that was not there before. So we could call the kind of strategic designer with some sensitivity of service designers, to use our languages. But they are not expert design. They invented it. They did it because human beings are capable to think, to have this design approach, to have to apply this design thinking. At the same time, there are those that have been trained as designer and in some way make their life selling their own capability to help a co-design process. And so we have to understand when we talk about design and this kind of movements, when we talk about the generic capability to design and the possibility to increase the average capability to design, and what could be the specific expert design role that could be to help everybody to be a better designers. So to help the process of co-design to happen in a certain way.
You had one example yesterday when we talked about musicians. I think that one could really help explain the picture.
Yes, but I have to say that the metaphor are good and terribly bad, because every metaphor tell a part of the story but don't tell the other part. So in this case, the metaphor was in the village where I live. There is a beautiful band where there are elderly people, young people, everybody together, and they like to play. And they are amateur. And afterward, there is a professional musician that helps them in playing better. So the differences in between who is the expert musician and the fact that everybody of this group like to play is quite evident. And the expert musician is not only making the director, but is helping all of them to play better. And the result is that this band is a good band. What is weak in this metaphor is that we have, who are designers in between us, we have not to think that by definition we are the director, because it's not said that in the group we are mandatory the director.
No.
This kind of directorship in a co-design process has to be gained on the field. So if we are capable to be the leader, we will be the leader, but maybe not. And therefore, this is the weak part of the metaphor.
You've talked about, Eva-Karin, about a sense of belonging in people that have joined the team and the group, where they feel that they didn't know that they were part and now they see that they belong to something?
Yeah, that's also a strength of design, where you could visualize futures. And I would like to connect to this movement that we see in Swedish healthcare today, where we started with the heroes. We could see social services that people start. It always starts with a hero. In Värmland it's called Experiolab, and it starts with a few people that actually wants to change the Swedish healthcare through design. And now we see that the structures are meeting them.
Yeah.
And now we have not only one Experiolab, we have almost 4 in different counties of Sweden. So the heroes are met by the structures, and they create new heroes, or, as you say, directors. But I would also like to raise the importance of the people that is not experts, and how we can help them to be better users of the design process. If you are a nurse and you have been working in the healthcare for 40 years, how can design make you a better service provider for the people that you meet every day? And I think there's a lot of power in that kind of process, and design could be the process actually making this power, freeing this power in structures. And
when we're talking about design in this way, I think a lot of us agree, but aren't we losing the picture of design as most people see it? How do we explain what's going on? Because we're seeing a new wave of design come in, and you've mentioned that there are new things that are happening, and there's maybe even a new rebirth of design.
Yeah.
And how do we then make that relevant for what's going on?
Well, the best way would be to have several examples in which designer did a good job.
Absolutely.
So, of course, to have it, something has to happen. But let's imagine that in some way we will have, for each area of activity in each region, 3, 4, 5, 6 very good examples in which it's very clear that the presence of the designer in the system has been helpful, this will be, without trying to give an abstract definition, will be the tangible evidence. We can say, but if we don't have this kind of example, how we can do? And of course, it's a process that has to grow through some experimentation. It's not easy. But I want to say that in a very fast and deep changing world, the same question can be done by practically every possible disciplines. So it's not only our discipline that has to be rethought. If you wanted to keep us in a good mood, I can say that we as a designer, even in the traditional design, we are accustomed to a certain ambiguity. We are accustomed, it's 1 century that design asks itself what is design. So paradoxically, we are much better equipped to discuss this change. Somebody that has been a lawyer, it thought that the lawyer was very clear and well defined, but maybe now it's not so much. And therefore for them maybe it's more difficult than for us. In any case, to go back to answer, we have desperately to find a condition in which we can do it. And we can realize something visible and tangible. And how we can do it. Again, it's a kind of social innovation in the social innovation. So we have to innovate ourselves, innovate what the other expect from us, and we have to have places in which this experimentation can happen. And here I go back to something that Eva was saying. When you have to start this interaction in between something that is from the bottom and organize, use a networked, local but connected organization and institutions, how to do it, it has to be invented. And therefore we have to, in some way, clarify to ourselves and to the other that we are, and in my view, we will be for decades at least, in an experimentation phase. What does it mean to be in an experimentation phase? It means that what we do are experiment. What is the difference between an experiment and a normal project? That the experiment, by definition, can fail. And so you are to be allowed to fail, but to fail clearly, and this is the experiment, because if an institution today fail, in Italy at least, they try to put the failure under the carpet, because you are not allowed to fail. And therefore you cannot learn from failure. Where if you assume that we are in experimentation phase, you have to know that it's possible to fail, and the failure, if seen in the right way, could be the basis on which to make new experience. The result is that given the institution as a whole cannot enter in an experimentation phase, more or less everywhere in the world with different name, there are some labs that are emerging that could be called public innovation lab, some kind of living lab. And this is exactly the motivation. If you want to have an institution that start to understand how to interact with these bottom-up initiatives that are so terribly new, you cannot imagine in general that the overall institution do it at once. So you have to create place where this kind of new interaction become possible, and they create good example, and we are at the point that we said before. Afterward, we will have some good example that in case can spread.
Eva-Karin, you had a comment there.
Yeah, the people-powered future. If you want to know more about it, we're right around the corner with a lot of organizations and information of what this process is also all about. And right now we're in the second experimental phase. We're nothing but a visual cloud and a lot of people and organizations in it working with design. The only thing that connects us is design.
Yeah.
And we trust each other and we build activities due to the needs of, we're trying to understand the society's need of design. So we use design as a innovation driver in the public sector, in the policy sector. We have been to the parliament trying to make the member of parliaments understand that design is also important when you make regulations that actually affects people every day. You have to be in an experimental phase also when you're a member of the parliament. We also have activities, as I said, in the healthcare or in the place innovation and how you develop regions. And the only thing connecting us in this big cloud is design. And I would say this is a beginning of a tangible, actually evident, that design is making a difference in a lot of places in society.
Now, if that's the case, is education prepared to make this shift fast enough?
I will say no, as nobody, included me and probably us, are, oh my God, there is a change of water here.
You guys are
Very
drinking
effective, thank you. So I think that nobody is really prepared. Everything is bigger, but we have to be, sorry if I repeat, we have to be prepared to experiment. So I am not complaining that the majority of the university in which it happened to me to be are not fully prepared to this. Sometimes I'm complaining that they are not daring to make some experiment. Because if you don't, so this is the point. If you don't do something, you cannot learn. And if you do not learn, you cannot change. So when things move so fast, you cannot say, stop one moment, I want to reshape everything. Because in the time that it takes you to reshape everything, things are already changed. So there is this kind of new idea of, let me say, of revolution that is not I look to everything and I change everything in one shot. It's I try to find the places in which there are some window of opportunity to make things differently, to learn from what I've done and to try to expand it. And this is again the positive loop. And at a certain point, maybe the institution, hopefully the institution as a whole, will change. But the only way to change, to imagine that they could change in this fluid reality, is through experimentation of something that open. And this is very designerly, because it's not so much the big planning, it's much more the capability to locally understand where there are not only where there are the problems, but also where there are the opportunities, and work on the opportunities. In my view, one way to talk about social innovation is that normally we say we are conscious designers, so we look to the problem and we try to solve the problem. I think, okay, we have to look to the problem, but if you only look to the problem, you don't see the resources that exist. So you have to spend equal time looking to the problems, but also looking where there are some opportunity and try to leverage on the opportunity to solve the problem, because otherwise you should be God to solve the problem with bare hands.
I would like to raise that question to everybody that is listening to this, because it's also very threatening to make this change. If we could talk about it, how you can make it in society. One of the biggest things that we are working with in the people-powered future is how are we creating design-aware leaders? And what can you ask for if you are a design-aware leaders? If you just take a few seconds and you think about your structures where you are working, everyone that is actually sitting here, how allowing is your structure for failure and experimental? And that is one of the biggest things, I think, that it's not about anyone else. It's about a way of changing us. We are educated today to create solutions. Maybe we don't know the solutions. We just need to trust the process to give us the solutions. But we are raised to have the answers. We are not raised to have the questions. So I think it's very threatening also for the structures and for people that's trying to be heroes or making failures to learn and how to develop society.
We're going to have a microphone go through the audience here very shortly. So think of the questions you want to ask. I'm going to ask one more question. And that is, if we're talking about these structures here that we're fairly convinced exist and they are good, is there a public intervention needed? Is there something that has to happen for this to actually flourish, or will it just happen? Is there money needed? Are there people needed? Are there structures? I mean, what actually should make this become reality big scale?
Yeah, that's the thing. I think the process is needed, and we often say we need more money. That's not the question. We need a different way of organizing and talking about. It's not about lowering or hiring taxes. It's about creating structures that could support heroes. And we always talk about the visual things in society, and I think it's very important for us to trying to be and to create tangible results out of processes, not only tangible stuff.
Yeah, I agree, and I can add that if we had time to discuss more, we could see some political implication of this discussion. Because maybe somebody in between you knows that something relatively similar to what we said now could be considered as a strong neoliberalist position. The neoliberalist position says, oh, the society, you are so good, do it by yourself, and the state can not to do anything. At the beginning of the campaign of Cameron, he started this program that was called the Big Society. That is interesting because before, Madam Thatcher was saying there is nothing, society do not exist. Cameron says society exists, and they are so good that they can do by themselves. And you don't need any intervention of the state. Where I think that the state is very important, and it has to understand what is happening, because if the state do not understand, it can kill the new idea that emerge, because the new idea are very often out of the law, in a gray area. If you do something that is radically new, probably there is no set of law that contemplate it. So the institution has to recognize if there is something good, and I say to experiment, and afterwards they have to become a partner. One of the slogans that tell the change is from the traditional welfare state to something that can be called the partner state, where the welfare is, I'm here and I give you whatever you need. The partner, I'm here and we discuss what you need. And as a state institution, I try to do what is necessary. I want just to say, and only because very shortly, Eva was referring to what is happening with the migrants. And I thank you to have mentioned it, and I want to mention again at the end of my part of the presentation, because first of all, it's such a dramatic story. Secondly, I feel really guilty if I talk about social innovation and design without touching this point. Because beyond my personal, as a human being, concern from what is happening, it's really an issue of social innovation, and there is really the need of design. And I repeat what Eva already said, but I want to underline it because for me it's the synthesis of dramatic, because the flow, I prefer to call migrants than refugees, because they are not only the refugees, the migrants are and will be millions. Can we stop them? No. So they are, the new society has to imagine itself as a society that includes. So it's not the issue that we are the society and we have to include these people, but the society is a society that has structurally these moving groups of people. It's incredibly new. We have never had this kind of vision of the society. So it's a typical field in which we have to experiment. The people, so the institutions are very cautious, and they try to say, no, wait one moment, and they discuss it. And the people say, but no, it's natural. You are on the street, come in my home. But these heroes can be worn out if the state, the institution do not come and support and help and give guarantee. So this is a typical example in which the several people, several heroes started to do something because it was obvious that there was something to do. And now we need some form of intervention that permit to those people to go on and maybe to say, okay, now I'm tired, you can go on somebody else. So this is a very typical
it's a perfect example.
It's a perfect example, and unfortunately it's a very dramatic example.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Surely we have some questions. We have one over there.
I'll try and break the ice. There's an issue that I'm not completely able to elaborate completely, but there's an issue of scale and the way we think about scale. So you're trying to do something local to have global effect, but if we apply a logic that comes from, let's say, an industrial age to these things, and industrial design or design has a strong link to that age, how do we avoid the same pitfalls that we've fallen into now?
Yeah.
I would say we have to leave the industrial way of thinking. And I think that step is not taken yet because the structures are still thinking industrial. And I think that's one of the most important things, that society is not an industrial society anymore.
Yeah, well, I can add something. There is a first answer, relatively simple, and another one that make everything more complicated. We can look to the past and say, in the past there was the economy of scale, that every good idea has to scale becoming bigger. In the network society, you have an economy of scope, and you can imagine small things interconnected. So the idea that to have a big impact, you have to be big as an entity is not given, because you can have a big impact through many small things interconnected. I call the SLOC scenario, small, local, open and connected. Unfortunately, we have been accustomed in some way to measure the new on the background of the last century industry. But now to confuse you, not you, but in general the idea, to confuse also my ideas, we start to see some trap of the 21st century, and just to make the name so it's short, is the Uber and Uberization. So the Uberization is totally in the new, it's totally 21st century, but for some reason that involve, in my view, also that institution has not been capable to make their own role, and designer has helped a design, because Uber is very well designed. It's a design-driven company, designing it in a way that for some people, including myself, is really very dangerous. So it's relatively clear how the networks can try to avoid, could have an alternative to the traditional way of growing, but at the same time we have to be very attentive to new problematic way of using the network, of using the half of the same language that we use this today to generate something that for some reason could be, at least for me, dangerous. And after all, we should discuss if it is really dangerous or not.
I think we need to leave the stage for the next team. So let's continue this discussion off stage. Give them a warm hand for these two great champions.